Welcome to Lamore's Cards and Horrors. I'm Matthew, and this is another cEDH beginner guide video where I have experienced members of the community come on to teach you about one of their decks. If you enjoy this video, like, comment, subscribe, consider supporting me on Patreon so I can make more of these and make them better for you. And with that, I'll pass it over to this episode's guest.
Hi, my name is Eric Taylor, and I'm here to bring to you Korvold, the Mad King. Is a turbo Ad Nauseam cEDH strategy that uses the super powerful ritual / creature Dockside Extortionist. So how Dockside functions in our deck, Dockside makes treasure because the treasures are a sacrifice trigger which play really well with Korvold's static ability. Korvold draws a card whenever you sacrifice a permanent. So not only are we creating a ton of mana, but we're also generating card advantage and making our Korvold massive. Basically effectively creating a pseudo Ad Nauseam within itself allows us to dig into our deck to create layered combos to help close out the game. So with this deck in particular, you want to be really aggressive with your mulligan. You're trying to close the game out, ideally on turns 2, 3, and 4, and as late as 5. You want to mulligan for an early Dockside Extortionist or Ad Nauseam. You have many ways to generate card advantage, so don't be afraid to cast a Korvold off a turn 2 Dockside, then utilizing your reanimation spells to get you back into the game. Being in Jund gives us access to all the rituals and fast mana, along with all the awesome tutors. So in Jund, we have access to a really cool combo that can help close out the game with a Bloom Apprentice, which has a really unique ability called Magecraft. And we're going to combine that with an old forgotten card called Chain of Smog. Chain of Smog is a black and a colorless sorcery. And what it does, it allows you to target a player to discard 2 cards, and that player may copy that. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to target ourselves, discard 2 cards, and we actually don't need the requisite number of cards in our hands. We could just continuously copy it using Witherbloom's Apprentice ability, which drains the table of 1 to close out the game. So a typical turn 1, I'm looking for fast mana and a tutor. I don't really look for a lot of interactions. I try to let that come to me more naturally after a Korvold comes into play, or if happen to be lucky, an Ad Nauseam resolves. Something as simple as a land mana dork pass with a vampiric tutor or worldly tutor up, or ideally even a turn 1 Imperial Seal with some fast mana. So we can basically always try to tutor for Dockside Extortionist or Ad Nauseam based on the pod composition. Turn 2, if we're fortunate enough to have our tutor resolve, we're going to try to establish, let's say, a Dockside Extortionist. We're going to hopefully let that Dockside come into the battlefield, generate anywhere from 4 to 6 treasures. Try to cast a Korvold if we don't have access to Ad Nauseam or something like Peer into the Abyss. Korvold's going to enter the battlefield, and more than likely, we're going to eat the Dockside Extortionist. Then we're going to draw a card, hopefully have a reanimation spell in our hand, cast something like an Unearth, Animate, Dead, or Reanimate on the Dockside, come back into play, generate 4 to 6 more treasures, if not more, and then at that point we're just trying to storm off and establish a win from there. So some of the things I'd like to go over that I see, especially in the Turbo Ad Nauseam style Korvold decks, is being too patient and not pressing the advantage when they have it, leaving their treasures out there and not attempting to find a reanimation piece or a tutor to continue what the deck is supposed to do, and that's continuously storm. You're not a control deck. You can't play very well on the stack, though we do have some small pieces, more so that's to protect us when we go for a win versus trying to control the stack. Those are some of the most common things I see, and not being very aggressive in their mulligan decisions. Korvold's great and all, but Korvold's also very resource hungry. So you want to mostly have like a Dockside Extortionist or some other form of card generation effect, Ad Nauseam, a wheel effect, Peer into the Abyss, things like that. You don't want to sit there and try to do like a sack here, a sack there. All the cards that sacrifice are well and good, but ultimately we're trying to find that vast amount of sacrifice generation through Dockside Extortionist. So some common mistakes is only utilizing your combo pieces for the combo, but something as powerful as twin flaming a Dockside Extortionist or even an Eternal Witness to get that advantage back. Utilizing Twin Flame to copy cards like Stormkilling Artist to essentially create our pseudo Dockside to where we play into the spells of the deck to generate more treasures as we play it. Korvold out, we can continuously draw, fuel our hand, and the same function goes with Saw in Half. It doesn't always have to, quote, combo off. Saw in Half on a Dockside that makes 5 treasures you're going to have 12 treasures overall. At that point, you're going to have a lot of wiggle room with what you're trying to do, whether it's cast something like an Ad Nauseam or Appear into the Abyss, or even just get a Korvold online to draw some additional cards to maybe find something like a Noxious Revival or Eternal Witness to start again. So don't look and be dogmatic in the view sets. Utilize Twin Flame and Saw in Half to just take advantage of the pieces that are in the deck. First time glancing at it, it looks pretty good. You'd go, oh yeah, I have Lotus Petal, 2 lands, and technically you have a turn 1 Arcane Signet. But once you do that, where do you go from there? Like, the Eternal Witness doesn't really push us forward. It doesn't add anything to the mix. It's not like that we have like a tutor in our hand. If like that Eternal Witness is a tutor, I mean, it would be an auto keep. That hand inherently is too slow for what the deck's trying to do. Okay, so this hand, pretty interesting. What I do like about this hand is that it needs another piece, but what you can do is you can play a turn 1 Tinderwall. That Tinderwall will allow you to have 2 mana on turn 2. You can play your second land, and then you can cast a Stormkilling Artist. Now, that right there in itself isn't as sexy, but what it does, being able to saw in half our own Stormkilling Artist. Now, this one would almost be kind of pod dependent for me a little bit. It's, again, not what the deck's entirely capable of. It's very pod dependent because if that Abrupt Decay, if we're playing against, let's say, something like a Drannith Magistrate or something of those type of nature, then I might be kind of inclined to keep this hand. That Abrupt Decay could give us exactly what we need. We could let the Drannith stay out there as long as we had to basically keep all the other people at bay, and then Abrupt Decay if need be. This is a greedy hand, but I would keep it. So we're gonna keep the hand. So I would, now we can draw a card and see what we're gonna do with it. Seed order really matters here. But let's say we're Magical Christmas Land, we're going first. We're obviously got a turn 1 Ragavan, which is just like, mwah. The Imperial Seal can go get Dockside Extortionist. So we can imprint the color ritual, Imperial Seal for the Dockside, play a turn 1 Ragavan, we'll untap, we'll draw the Dockside, we can play the Soul Ring, cast the Dockside, you have a colorless mana floating, and then utilize the Summoner's Pack to go get the Witherbloom Apprentice, slam the Witherbloom Apprentice, tip the Chain of Smog. Now that is just basically putting it on the table, praying to be disrupted, but that is inherently a pretty powerful turn. That's a turn 2 hand. Also, too, what's quite interesting is depending on the decks that we're playing against, it could be really sneaky. We could actually imprint the Chain of Smog, utilizing the Imperial Seal to go get something like Ad Nauseam, play the Soul Ring, now Culling Ritual, probably generate a ton of mana, cast Ad Nauseam. So this hand can actually do quite a bit. This is a really multifaceted hand. It's pretty interesting what it can do. Let's first talk about what the deck might struggle with. Graveyard Hate, an early Drannith Magistrate, or really Black-White X stacks list are probably going to be the most problematic with the current construction of the way the deck is. Opposition Agent is really bad for almost every deck out there, so if they just happen to have 3 mana open and you cast the Tutor blindly into it or fetch blindly into it, those are things that you can absolutely look at as a new player, is seeing what your opponent's doing. If they're playing black and they're playing a mid-range style variant, probably safe to say there's something like an Opposition Agent in there, and just be kind of cognizant of playing around that. Don't feel like you have to be cute and fetch at the end of your opponent's turn. Just go ahead and fetch now, especially with the proactive list. Now, if I obviously have a tutor in my hand, that's a little bit different, like an instant speed tutor. Again, I still, if I'm playing against those decks, I never want to give the opportunity to allow the opponent to capitalize on my mistake. I like playing against mid-range decks because the mid-range decks, like the Thrasios list, they're not like full of super stacksy creatures. I like playing against other turbo lists with another control element involved, because then the other control style decks are going to interact with the turbo list, which will allow me to take advantage of that. Obviously, seed order kind of matters. Hands, mulligans, the variance of the game itself. I also like playing against green decks like Ashaya or Morrowind or Savala or something like that, because I feel like those decks don't really do a lot to interact with me and what I'm doing, unless I just happen to have an early collector ooth. I actually don't mind playing against stacks decks if I get an early Korvold out, because then I'm just going to try to turn Korvold sideways on the player who's locking me down, try to eat him with Korvold essentially. So if you like to go fast and also have a big, powerful dragon, I would absolutely suggest Korvold and other variations of Korvold. Ultimately, how you play Commander is up to you. If there are certain cards in the list that don't match really well with your playstyle or what your pods and meta is doing, please feel free to change the deck up. On this particular list, there is under the sideboard, while we don't have sideboards in Commander, I put a variation of cards. It's also in the primer of considerations of swaps. So if you want to take a quick look, go enjoy that. It'll give you some ideas of how to break parity with the things that are kind of keeping you from doing the things you enjoy.